defines a generation. Music is a soundtrack of revolution. Music is a soundtrack of movement. Music is a soundtrack of cause. There is an intersection of politics and pop culture that you didn't even know existed. There's some boy, some girl sitting in a cubicle along K Street, somewhere in DC. A boy, a girl sitting in a cubicle along a hill with a Capitol with a dome who has single-handedly decided what you wore today. Whoa.
Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
I'm gonna pop some tags, only got $20 in my pocket.
What's happening, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse, and welcome back to the Mike Muse Show. I'm so happy you guys have decided to join me today and every Wednesday. It has been a fascinating journey with you guys. I am having a ball, as I say every week. It seems like you are too as well, by the way you tweet me and you DM me and you send me messages on Instagram, and I can't thank you enough for that. And I can't thank you enough for the emails that you have. I can't wait to keep the conversation going with you. And listen, I got word from the suits up top that we're going to go live soon, and so that way you'll be able to call into the show and ask me any question that you want. And I'm really super excited for that conversation. Listen, if you can't tell, I have some very stylish gentlemen that are to my left and to my right. You may not know, but it's Fashion Week here in New York City. And as you know, this show intersects politics and pop culture and really pulling back the layers of policy through lifestyle, that's sports, music, film, and fashion, to really show how policy has an impact on our day-to-day, the things that we wear. Heck, even the jacket that I'm choosing to wear here today has some policy implications. And so I couldn't think of a better way than to have a deep dive around policy, in particular as we talk about tariffs, right? And shoes and clothing and denim and cotton and all these commodities that we're talking about all has a political implication. And we talk about gentrification, but we always talk about it from affordable housing. But what does that look like from a business owner's perspective? And what is gentrification like when it comes to classism? And so I have some thoughts about that, and I think you will too as well before we conclude this show today. So let's go ahead and just get to it. I don't want to waste any of the time with the two cats that I have. What's interesting is this show really is a full circle moment for me. Talk about the entire 360 model of it. To the left, I have a guy, he goes by the name of Alex Sumner. And Alex, to me, has been, I don't know if a fashion muse is what I would call it, but he is definitely the one who has shaped my style. He has shaped my perspective on how I see fashion and really how I see dressing. And Alex and I met through the nightclub scene. He was one of the most stylish doormen in New York City. And you guys all know New York City has a history of having difficult doormen. And Alex is one of those difficult ones. And he only worked at the best nightclubs that we had here in New York City. But he was a nice guy, though. And he was always very stylish. And one day he had on this multicolored seersucker suit. And I just had to go up to him and I was like, yo, I've been checking you out. Where did you get this suit from? And he told me that he made it himself. And I was like, no way. In that moment, we began to forge a really great friendship and really began to forge a really great fashion relationship to where he started making all my custom pieces for me for all my birthday moments. I remember we go to Mood Fabrics and we'll pick out fabrics that we thought would be perfect for the moment. And there was something about when I dressed in Alexander Sumner's clothes, it made me feel like a king. And then in that moment, I recognized the power of fashion in terms of how one can feel on the inside based upon the external presentation that they have. There was a relationship that Alex and I had that we actually went into so much care to really bring out what my personality was. And so this is who he is, man, just a visionary. He has his education background and used to teach history. And so he has a wild perspective on how he sees fashion. And so at this time, I just want to just welcome into the conversation, Mr. Alexander Sumner. What's happening, Alex?
I'm good. Thank you, Mike.
Did I get everything right?
You got everything right.
You got to come a little bit closer to the microphone there.
You got one thing. You got one thing dramatically wrong, though, and that is that we don't want to use the word fashion. We want to use the word style. Style. Because fashion is something that's temporal. Mm-hmm. It's manipulated by the market, whereas style is timeless, classic, and easier to. It's not contingent upon having or not having money.
Yeah,
So,
well, hold that thought, because you're going to take me down a place that I'm excited to go when it comes about money or not having money. And this gentleman to my right, I can't begin to tell you how he and I met so serendipitously, and it's actually because of Alex. Alex is always going to be a recurring story within my life. Alex allowed me to borrow his hat for this festival that I was hosting this summer, and as you can see, I have a bald head, and I get sunburned really easy. And so I said, well, let me just go and try to find like a cheap straw hat that I can use. And I bumped into Alex in front of his store. He said, Mike, just take my hat, borrow it for the weekend, bring it back to me on Tuesday. And of course, it's summer, it's hot, it's sweaty. I ended up getting like a stain on like the ribbon part of the hat. And I was like, I can't give my boy's hat back like this. I have to go buy the new one. So I looked and flipped the hat over to see what the brand was of it. And I said, oh, Flamekeeper's hat. Let me go search it. I found those in Harlem. I said, well, let me go up to Harlem and repurchase it. So I go up there and I'm walking in this incredible looking boutique hat store. When you walk in, you just felt again like a king. You kind of felt like you're stepping into the Godfather. It was that kind of scene. And I met this gentleman, Marc, to my right, Marc Williamson, and he was so cool. And I told him what I needed. And next thing I know, it was raining. Thank God it was raining, because I stalled a little bit. And next thing I know, I'm having a half-hour conversation with Marc about the hat industry, about being a small business owner in Harlem, how Harlem is changing through gentrification, what does that look like to be a store owner in this dynamic. But Marc has an incredible history and career within the hat industry. He started off downtown New York working for another hat company, and that's where he learned the trade of the hat industry. And then from there, he took his talents up north to Harlem, where he began to open up this shop called Flamekeeper's Hat. He's been in the hat retail game for approximately... Flamekeeper's Hat Club.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alex is always correcting me when it comes to fashion, and so there's a teacher in him, I think.
Guilty.
Yeah.
For sure.
The Flamekeeper's Hat Club, and he's a 20-year vet of the retail and hat industry. Marc Williamson, welcome, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
Did I get the description right of your hat shop?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to be an experience.
Yeah.
That's what I say. Like, I always say that we don't sell hats, the hats sell themselves. They come to life when someone puts them on, actually.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing. But it's also a place to come, be easy, and have dialogue, which I guess is one reason why I'm up here now.
Why we're here now.
In this small world.
Yeah.
Of, I and Alex Sumner.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's just get into it. It's Fashion Week here. New York is always buzzing around Fashion Week. You can always tell when Fashion Week is here. For those who may not have the opportunity to attend the Fashion Week before, Alex, what are some of your favorite moments that you can recall from Fashion Week that you participated in or experienced? Anything that stands out to you at all?
I first attended Fashion Week probably 16 years ago, and at that point I was just getting into the game. I just connected with Mood Fabrics, and I was just beginning to make my own stuff. So I was like that wild, wide-eyed kid in a candy store, going to Bryant Park and watching the shows there. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And less so now, just because I'm consumed with having to work what seems like 7 or 8 days a week and 24, 25 hours a day. But I know it's an exciting time for the industry, and having been in the nightclub world for a long time as well, there are always the best parties around Fashion Week. So
I think for me, Marc, as I come to you, when I think about Fashion Week, man, Fashion Week has changed a lot. It's becoming very decentralized. And now the tents are no longer the focal point of fashion, right? So these designers have their shows almost throughout the entire 5 boroughs, if you will. Before it used to be concentrated to Bryant Park and the tents, but there's always used to be this electricity in the air when you were like inside the tent. I think for me, one of my favorite shows, Alex, I ever attended was anything Marc Jacobs. So any Marc Jacobs show was a fantastic fashion show for me. And then in terms of Alex at parties, we actually have a mutual friend by the name of Gia Golden. And Gia Golden used to be the events director for Diesel North America. And so whatever fashion party Gia threw, that was my favorite Fashion Week party. And then I have to say, man, my favorite fashion moment was actually inspired this conversation with having dinner at Anna Wintour's house. And so Anna Wintour is, as you know, the editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine. But for you, Marc, what is it about Fashion Week for you that you enjoy, and what does it really signal for you?
I really I'd say enjoy just the people. I'm a people guy. Mm-hmm. So the people that come from around the country, from around the world, and come to, with the intent and the idea of expressing themselves, and see how these designers and fashion houses are going to express themselves. I also enjoy, I think particularly for the past couple of years, how, like you said, they've gone away from the tents. They've gone away from Bryant Park, and all these brands have been forced almost to become creative and reinvent themselves, and, have a fashion show just outside on the street. Someone may have their fashion show in a library, with different themes, and because it almost becomes like New Year's Eve or like Halloween. And I think the creativity is inspiring, and, I think it helps a creative, feel like, okay, what I'm doing is justified, the time, the hours and work that I'm putting in. But also, if you see great work being done, it may make you say, you know what? I'm not doing enough.
That's very true.
And to push me further. So that's what I enjoy about Fashion
Week.
And
I think now with it being decentralized, it opens up for more individuals to have touch points with Fashion Week. Before, Fashion Week was a very close-knit entity, right? And it was really difficult to get those tickets. And so I was really thankful that I had the opportunity to participate in it from while I was at Bryant Park, when it moved over to Lincoln Center, and now it's just all throughout the city. And to your point, Marc, I think it allows more creativity, not only from the designers themselves and experience, but for those who are up and coming, to get a chance to see it. Now we have the blogs. Now we have live streams. But for me, as I said, what was my muse behind this conversation was kind of that part. It was the openness. Fashion has always had like this elitism kind of perspective to it. And I recall when I walked into Anna Wintour's house, I was really nervous, right? I think anybody would be nervous going into Anna Wintour's house in terms of what are you going to wear, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I don't want to go too over the top, but I don't want to go too subtle. And what I did was I found this.
Mike, do I remember having conversations about what to wear? You reaching out to me, asking me, I have to go to her.
What do I do? And I was funny, I actually sent you a picture to see did you approve of this jacket, and you actually styled me for it. Okay. And it was this blazer that I bought at a thrift shop in Georgia. And it was this plaid tuxedo jacket. And Alex told me to rock these blue pants and this white button-down shirt. But I remember thinking, like, I paid $2.50 for this jacket. Can I really walk into Anna Wintour's house with a thrift jacket? And I said, you know what? I'm going to try it and take a chance. And I walked in, and she said, Mike, you look amazing. And I was like, what? Right? I was like, well, I can just go home. The dinner is done. But in my mind, I got such a adrenaline rush knowing that this jacket cost me $2.50. And I know everyone else is wearing like 100 times X what that was costing. But then it made me really think about thrifting. Right. And then it made me think about the dynamics of thrifting. And here in New York City, when you go to these thrift stores are actually, the products are expensive.
They can be.
They can get on the pricier side versus what you would see normally. I was born and raised, the listeners know, from Michigan, particularly from Lansing, Michigan. The prices of thrift stores in Lansing, Michigan are much cheaper. We're talking $1, 50 cents, 75 cents, as compared to some of the thrift stores that are here in Manhattan and the prices of it.
I think the difference with Manhattan, with New York in general, I think here you have thrifting boutiques and thrift shops, and they're different. I think the thrifting boutiques, per se, can get a little costly, but I think the thrift shops are still very affordable. But it's one thing about thrifting, and I used to be a heavyweight thrifter. Actually, these jeans I'm wearing right now, these selvage denim, maybe I paid $10 for them.
Yeah.
I was going every week, but that's the one thing I learned. And I learned reading Esquire magazine. It was a guy who had won, I guess, the best dressed guy of the year that year. And he was a vintage guy. And he said, but the one thing about thrifting is, you have to go every week. It's not something that you can go like once a month, once every 2 weeks and think you're going to find something. This is one of those things you have to be committed to. And if you go, once a week to these thrift shops that aren't super expensive, you definitely can score.
Right.
You definitely can score.
Well, Alex, do you think, though, with the separation of what Marc has classified thrifting and thrift boutiques, that those who are interested in fashion, those who are the fashion bloggers, those who are stylists, if you will, or those who are interested in styling, curating a certain look, do you think they are scouring those thrift shops? Like I'm thinking about the Goodwills, right? Those who aren't just thrift boutiques. Do you think those in areas like Los Angeles and really major metropolitan areas are actually raiding some of those racks and causing any adjustments to some of the cost and pricing of those articles of clothing for those who actually need to take advantage of those low cost of clothing to clothe themselves?
I would say there's a lot less, it's like a fraction of the people that I've seen in the last 30 years, or actually 40 years shopping vintage, that are there, that are hipsters trying to find that great garment to wear to Anna Wintour's dinner. So I don't.
Guilty.
There's undoubtedly there are many, as Mark said, like thrift boutiques, people that have taken the time to curate through the rag bins and what have you, and have culled together really beautiful garments that are very, very expensive. So.
Mark, is that a sign of someone who knows fashion really well, that can spot trends, that can do thrifting boutiques?
Oh, I mean, well, knows fashion, or like Alex said previously, has style.
Thank you.
Because it really, every time, it doesn't have to deal with money.
Right.
So you can, that's one reason why, stores like Zara, H&M, are crushing it right now, because you can have someone who's into fashion and walk past a person who has maybe the top Zara, the bottom H&M, but just has an expensive pair of shoes on, or an expensive hat on, and you wouldn't know where they got their clothes from or how much it costs. So that's where the style comes into play. And like I said, stores like H&M and Zara, they've capitalized on that in a very major way. And another thing I think with the thrifting is, when you talk about middle America, I don't think you would definitely find the, great, exceptional, quote unquote, pieces if you're not in a city. Because what I found in thrifting is, you found the best pieces in great neighborhoods. So Upper West Side, Goodwill is very different than, the Goodwill in Harlem. Well, maybe not today, with gentrification, which I'm sure you're going to lead into that conversation. But, or, the Goodwill in Soho is definitely going to have better stuff than the Goodwill in Jamaica, Queens, in New York City. So that's where you really find the variation, because you have the people who are giving the clothes, who are giving it to Goodwill. If it's from a place with money, then the clothes are going to be way more expensive. And if it's from an area that socioeconomically is not doing as well, then the clothes are going to be
Well, I think interesting about that. I think I'm feeling more confident about myself in sense of style. Because I found some of my best pieces actually in the smaller cities. So the jacket that I actually wore to Atlanta was in Douglasville, Georgia. And then my favorite jacket that I found has actually been in Lansing, Michigan. And it's interesting, the items I find in the smaller cities are the ones where I kind of get the most compliments from. And so maybe that means I have a good eye. I think, Alex, you've taught me well when it comes to that.
Yeah, but I think that goes back to the style too, because over fashion, because you picked something that you liked and it just happened to crush it. And I think that's a matter of taste. I think, not fashion. Because you were nervous about what Anna Wintour would say. It wasn't something you picked and be like, oh, I just saw this in Vogue last week. Oh, so I know this shit's gonna be right. So that, I think it's more to do with your taste.
Well, Alex, you bring up earlier when you mentioned about style and fashion isn't about money. Per se. As we know, a lot of Americans now are thinking about their budgets a little bit more. We're in that back to school season where parents are either still shopping for their kids' back to school clothes, or they're going to be gearing up for the holiday season, right? And starting their savings accounts when it comes to that. How do you see when people think about fashion and good fashion, normally it has to be expensive. How do you see that though? In a sense, when it comes to being able to identify good clothes, good style, but may not mean the most expensive item?
Well, when it comes to our 16-year-old son, or when it comes, well, my 16-year-old son wants the best Nikes that he can get. You know, he wants to get the KDs. We spent time on 125th a week ago, trying to get him a new pair of sneakers. Whereas our daughter, who's 8, isn't so interested. Although my wife took her out the day that Kaepernick's commercial came out and figured she had to buy our daughter a pair of Nikes to represent. So
yeah.
As a parent, though, I think ultimately you're looking for quality, because I can't afford just to go out and buy something that has the right brand name, but doesn't necessarily have the quality and craftsmanship that's going to last.
Yeah. So when you mentioned 125th, and I want to take it to 125th, ladies and gentlemen, is Harlem. It's an iconic street for those who may or may not know, but I think everyone should know what 125th is.
The Apollo Theater.
Yeah, Apollo Theater. It's a very legendary street, iconic and historic. And this takes me right to you, Marc. You and I had a really fascinating conversation around the whole notion of gentrification. Your shop is located in a really popular space within Harlem that's seeing a lot of changes that are occurring. Yep. And what struck me as this really fascinating moment that we had was we always think about gentrification from a sense of affordable housing, right? And making sure that we protect the residents' ability to be able to maintain a cost of living within a certain neighborhood. But then we also, too, always talk about making sure the culture isn't removed from these communities, too, as well. But what we don't often talk about, at least for me, I wasn't really aware of the conversation, was the impact that it has on small businesses that have been there for a while before gentrification kind of takes place. Can you talk to us a little bit about that from that angle, in the sense of, should we be having conversations about how gentrification can have an impact on small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Gentrification can definitely have an effect on small businesses financially, based on the taxes. So if you're in an area that is being gentrified and they build up 1 or 2 luxury buildings in the area, more than likely the taxes are going to go up. So on top of the rent that you're paying, commercial rent that you're paying, you also have to pay, depending on your lease, how it was structured, maybe 10 to 20% of the taxes, that the building pays. And, that could be a chunk, especially when these areas are getting, fancy. So that's something that you have to consider financially within your business plan. And I mean, maybe, a small business can't afford it, or maybe they wouldn't even want to take the plunge, especially because, we're living in the age where, the internet is ruling, and, people are shopping online more than ever. And so just having a brick and mortar space indeed is challenging. And so it's challenging to even big brands, to keep people coming out and wanting to take a train ride or a car ride, or to park, or to go out their way to come and spend money with you, as opposed to just sitting in front of their computers or on their phones and, going click and getting it there. So I think, that the gentrification part is definitely a challenge in that regard. But I think as far as, retailers, brick and mortar businesses go, whether it be clothing, food, any medium, I feel like everything is changing right now in the world as far as standards and taste. And I think, again, I feel like the internet has a lot to do with that, like social media, because we're able to see so much more. We're able to see, great food from different places in the world. You're able to see people who dress well from different places all over the world. So some of them may be wearing something expensive. Some may be wearing something that's, inexpensive. But again, you're seeing a lot of things where the standard is being raised higher. So I feel like, and I tell this to people all the time, I feel like in the next 10 years, especially in places that are being gentrified in small neighborhoods and so on and so forth, I think if you're going to open a business and make it, I think you're going to have to raise the level, of the standard of your business. I think it's going to have to be, visually appealing. I think it has to be progressive. And like, I don't care if you're selling hot dogs, because you definitely, you have to compete, period, for business. But in setting up a shop in some place that people want to come and see, unless you're selling, ice cubes that don't melt, which means you're the only person that's going to have that business. If it's another business that someone else can do maybe as well or better than you, I think that you definitely have to challenge yourself to come with your A game, your best possible game.
Well, hold that thought right there, because we're going to take a break, but we'll come back on the other side. 'Cause I actually do want to go a little bit further with that comment. And Alex, I want to bring you into perspective too, because you've also had 2 brick and mortar establishments, one within the Chelsea area and then one downtown in the Soho area. But I'm curious, I'm going to keep asking, push back a little bit in terms of policy, because there are policy that are advocating for affordable housing, and that goes into real estate development, that goes into those who are owning buildings. They get tax incentives in order to keep a certain amount of affordable rates and rents. So then we need to ask a question, does that need to be going more towards the storefront operations too as well? Because that's something we really don't talk about that too often when it comes to that. So we're going to talk about taxes, real estate development, bonuses in order to build in those communities, and if politicians should be more aware of those businesses that actually are in those communities. So listen, grab a snack, come on back to the Mike Muse Show.
We go shopping like manana. Her attitude Rihanna. She get it from her mama. She jicky like Madonna, but she trippy like Nirvana. Cause everything designer. Her jeans is Helmut Lang, shoes is Alexander Wang, and her shirt the newest Donna.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We're having a fascinating conversation right now. Now we're heading into the policy aspect of fashion. I'm sitting with my 2 guests, Marcus Williamson and Alexander Sumner. And before the break, we were just talking about gentrification when it comes to small businesses. And so we were talking about it from a perspective of, there are policies associated with affordable housing, where these real estate development execs are ended up to get tax incentives in order to build in these communities, as long as they have an X amount of affordable rent and housing that is there. But what often gets left out of conversation that I had this moment about a week or 2 ago was how often we don't talk about the small businesses that have been in those neighborhoods who may also get a chance to get pushed out, and there is no advocacy for those. So just in your neighbors who are in Harlem, and it may not apply to you, and that's fair too as well, and you can say that too as well. Is this a conversation that your fellow neighbors, business neighbors and colleagues are having, and have there been any politicians who have approached you to talk about the feasibility of your storefront?
I mean, it's a conversation that I have. Don't talk about it too much with the business owners around. And politicians they haven't approached yet. But I feel like it's something that, they will approach us with in time, I think, because you have so many vacant storefronts here in New York City and all over the place. And it's definitely has to deal with the rent and how high the rent is. And so you have areas that just look super empty. You have luxury apartment buildings with, storefronts ready to be built into them, but they're empty. And you see the empty spaces, uptown, downtown, especially in Soho, Lower East Side, where these areas were thriving. Yeah. Really. And I mean, you look and I look at it as a retailer, and it makes sense to me because I know exactly what's going on. So they haven't had the conversation about it, but I know it has been done in certain areas where, like, there's a certain strip in Harlem where they created like a restaurant row, and it was empty, and they were like, okay, if you want to open up a restaurant, they gave, I don't know if they gave the tax breaks to the building owners or the businesses or so on and so forth, because I wasn't up there at that time, but I know it definitely happened and it definitely worked because that area is thriving.
So that's going to take me back downtown to Alex. And Alex, interesting about you is, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you a little sneak preview. As you hear me talk about all the time, entrepreneurship is a huge part of my platform. Technology is a huge part of my platform, into which I advocate when it comes to artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and how are we leveraging these areas, if you will, in terms of improvements of our lives. But I really want to begin to talk about it from an entrepreneurship perspective. And so I'm going to be releasing a paper that I've co-authored this week, and I'll make sure that you guys know about it, really surrounding this new wave of entrepreneurship and what entrepreneurs look like. It looks different. Marc has kind of just talked to us a little bit about this brick and mortar store, and now there's this hybrid of notion where there is a brick and mortar, but it's kind of going to an e-space, into a capacity where, Alex, for you, where you are the entrepreneur that I think about, and that I advocate for, and Marcus too as well, but in the sense of you started out as a doorman working in New York City nightclubs, and then you built up a clientele where you started doing custom pieces, and then you went in to have other ventures. And so it's, how do we advocate for those individuals who may not want that 3,000 square foot store, that may not want that 10,000 feet store, that may not want to have mass produced jackets or shoes or jeans, and like, how easy is it for an individual like you to walk into your local bank, on the corner, to get like a small business loan to open up, that kind of apparatus. So talk to us a little bit about that journey, Alex, when you transitioned from, going from a private clientele to actually having two storefronts, or a second store that you've opened up recently.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as Marc attests, rents are too damn high.
Yeah,
it really comes down.
Famous slogan I think we've heard recently.
It really comes down to that, and having seen that also in the nightclub world in the last 15 years, it's changed. The dynamic has changed night and day. It has gone. Because the rents are so high, venues seek to sell bottles and to do bottle service, which is a very expensive proposition. And it's super competitive. I think, as Marc also alluded to, this idea that in order to succeed, you have to really kind of look within and figure out, how can I do this in a competitive way to compete against a lot of other, intelligent entrepreneurs. It has been a challenge for us, trying to get those loans, trying to afford to come up with rent on and as going back to what Marc said in terms of e-commerce, there are less people in Soho that walk down West Broadway that are shopping. We see it. I see it in the other stores that are there, and the restaurants that are on the corners, and in the for rent spaces, the signs that you see. There's probably a 25% of the spaces in our area right down above Canal Street.
Alex, if you can open up a little bit more about that, and you don't have to speak from your first person's perspective, you don't have to divulge any private confidential information, but in the sense of your colleagues that you've had within this community of individuals like you, and the challenges you've had of going for entrepreneurship. And the reason why I'm kind of want to stick to this for a little bit, and Marc, you alluded to it, and there's this New York Times article that came out, and it talked about, so you're talking about the storefronts that are closing down in the Harlem area because of the cost of the rent.
Oh, yeah, all over
was
the
a
city,
strip on Bleecker Street that was out of Manhattan that used to be deemed the Rodeo Drive of Manhattan, right? And Marc Jacobs used to be there. He used to have 3 or 4 storefronts there.
Ralph
Lauren used to be there. And for ladies and gentlemen, for those of you, you can also too relate to it. That's where the famous Sex and the City scenes were, where Magnolia's Bakery used to be. Those famous cupcakes are, and so that is the strip that I'm talking about. But because of the cost of the rising rents, because they thought it was a booming market, they actually priced out the Marc Jacobs. They've actually priced out the Ralph Laurens. And so now what you see, what used to be this Rodeo Drive of Manhattan, these empty storefronts, right? And so these real estate developers and owners of these buildings are just holding this storefront, hoping to get a better return on the client who can afford to pay it. But that's also emblematic of what's happening too across all the urban cities within America, in the sense of like these abandoned lots, right? And people are holding out for this next moment, this next wave to come, and it actually impacts the quality of life for the communities and the residents that are there, which I think, Alex, is really interesting for you in terms of like, not only how do we advocate for those abandoned lots, how do we advocate for that storefront, how do we advocate for our politicians to be able to have conversation with these real estate developers as they're giving them tax incentives, right, with the flip side of having affordable housing, affordable rent. But Alex, for you, in terms of what makes individuals like the challenge that your colleagues have faced of getting the access to capital, because the point of this show is to tie in the policy, right? And what individuals don't really realize is finance is tied to politics. Finance is tied to D.C. and to Congress, and also too, finance is tied to our local politicians here too, within New York City or wherever city that you may reside in. So, what has been some of the challenges that people like you have faced when it comes to getting the access to capital, and how should politicians and policymakers be thinking about individuals like you and individuals like Marcus?
Well, I don't think anyone wants to see storefronts with for rent signs on them. It's not good for the restaurants in the area. It's not good for whether it's coffee shops or what have you. It's a little bit more difficult for me to speak because my experiences have been that I've been kind of the side of the brain that's the creative side, whereas I've had partners that have handled the financial side of it. So I can't necessarily directly answer to that.
Yeah.
So that's. But I think one of the things that Marc had said to me earlier was this idea that success breeds money. Money doesn't necessarily breed success.
Yeah.
So I've sought to try to create systems and within my business that lead to success. But it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah. And what Alex is alluding to, too, in terms of the challenge, he may not be aware of the creative side, but Marc, you play both worlds. So there's the creative aspect of you, and then there's also, too, the business aspect of you, right?
For sure.
As politicians are listening, and as we are, as the voters who are listening to the show, they may be budding entrepreneurs. They may have a business of their own where they want to get into the fashion industry, or they may, have children who are going to FIT or going to school for fashion design, and these are things that we're thinking about in terms of getting the access to capital, right? And because a lot of times we think about access to capital, we generally think about the brick and mortars. We think about the general industries, like a flower shop, a bakery, right?
Absolutely.
It's rare you think about a hat.
I think that's where, if there is money to be given or shared or thrown around, I think it is. Definitely they want something tangible, something that they're familiar with. When I was searching for a space in Harlem, I got turned down, by 2 buildings, financials, business plan, everything was in play, but they just didn't believe in a hat shop. So I think if you are doing something traditional, if you have a donut shop or a deli or something, I think these landlords will definitely be, more open to, letting you set up shop. And even with the lending money part of it, I think I don't know if we're there yet where the politicians are, on the front line and ready to have a conversation with these businesses. But there are, certain things that are in play.
But should they be ready, Marc? Just because they're not ready, and this is what I talk about all the time, and listeners, this to be true, is they only are ready for what we advocate for them to be ready for, right?
Absolutely.
If there's nobody pushing the conversation forward, then there's no need for them to pay attention to it, because to their credit, they have 1,000 other things that people are advocating for on their behalf. So is it a perspective?
Yeah, I think we need leaders we need leaders absolutely to rattle the can and, put the pans against the the prison bars. Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely a conversation that definitely needed to be had. I think especially because of, if you're not downtown in whatever city you're in, like Brooklyn is a perfect example. And I think it's happening all over the world that, great businesses, also small businesses, are coming just to your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're coming to your neighborhood. Yeah. So I feel like it's definitely a conversation that we should have, because you can make your neighborhood great by contributing and helping a small business with a great idea, great concept, great following, come to your neighborhood. And if they were to help these small businesses, just 2 small businesses, great small businesses in any neighborhood, is going to draw more traffic, and it's going to draw other businesses that are going to want to come and set up shop in your neighborhood.
Right.
That you can definitely take a box, 2 boxes here, and create a neighborhood.
Right.
And also it, unfortunately, it will allow the building owners there to increase the rent, because they're going to have definitely more traffic, more people wanting to people that are going to want to live there. But I think it's definitely a win situation for all involved. But definitely it's something that there should be some dialogue about.
I think that it also bears mentioning, too, that people with an entrepreneurial bent, people in creative industries, in fashion especially, I think the likelihood is that we're not going so frequently to the banks, but we're going to people to invest, people that we know, people that are, that dot-com mentality of like, let me invest in this person's idea and take it to another level, or we're going to family members and trying to raise capital that way.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Mike Muse Show here on Sirius XM, channel 121. You can always tweet me to get involved in this conversation. I know you're dying to, at I am Mike Muse, M-U-S is Sam E, and also, too, on the Insight channel at SXM Insight. Alex, you brought me to an interesting place. I didn't really think about going. We always talk about fashion in terms of from the political perspective from a couple of different advantages, right? Tariffs normally, also to the advocacy for larger corporations in terms of their import exports, the excise taxes, from things of that nature. But I don't feel like we bring in the little guys, if you will, right? Do you believe that there should be more conversation around the smaller entrepreneurs within the fashion industry to be engaged in the political discourse?
I think it would be great. I do. I think it perhaps there's not the money, let's say, within my walls that a large corporation has, but I think if you take 10 small Alexes or Marcs, then that can have a pretty dynamic impact on a community.
Mm-hmm. Because you guys are family men, right?
For sure.
Alex, you have 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
Marc,
I have 2 children.
You have 2 children too as well.
Yes,
I think what's really interesting that we're getting into the point of the conversation now, we're realizing that fashion just isn't about clothes, right? But fashion really is about changing neighborhoods. Fashion really is about changing dynamics, and fashion really is a business for individuals that who make the clothes. Are humans who have families, who pay taxes, who can really shape a community. And I think a lot of times we overlook and sometimes can be dismissive of fashion because of how we see it portrayed in the media, right, as this article of clothing, but not really realizing all that it took in order to make that garment.
Yeah, it's
right?
a hard game. Hard game.
Whether you are an entrepreneur or whether you actually work in the fashion industry yourself, right? There's so many different dynamics in the ecosystem of fashion.
Sure, and having been to China 11 months ago, I was able to see firsthand our manufacturer for our suits, the factory where those were made, and spend a day there talking to workers and to the people that ran that plant. You get a sense of the macro impact of fashion.
Yeah. Well, let's just go there since you're talking about China. We have been in the news a lot lately talking about tariffs that have taken place in China with President Trump essentially getting into a trade war, for lack of better words, with China. We seem to be going tit for tat with each other. I think now we're approximately at $100 billion of issues of tariffs from our side in terms of goods that President Trump wants to put a tariff on for China. And we could see that going up to $50 billion more. What's interesting about that is what comes through that is fashion items, and clothes, right? And particularly think about shoes. Shoes is probably one of the most main factors that could be impacted by this tariffs, right? And so, listeners out there, I know that you may think tariffs is such a big word. You may not understand how it relates to you and what that means, but it does have an impact. Even right now, we're currently paying at the rate of 11% tariffs on our shoes. And so if a shoe comes in at $25, you're going to multiply that. You take 11% of that, it's going to be roughly about like $28. You multiply that by 3 or 5 times, usually what the markup of it is, and you're looking at about an $87, $90 shoe. Out of that, you're paying about $8, almost $9 in terms of the tariff is coming out of that. And so if we increase tariffs even more, so there's some conversation, gentlemen, that it could go up to 35% of tariff. That $87 shoe, then it becomes approximately like $110 to $120 shoe, which is a huge difference, right? Especially that you guys have families of two kids trying to put clothes on and shoes on those two kids when the shoes goes up by that much, right? And so I'm just curious for the both of you, whether large or small, do you guys Do you guys think about that in your own businesses, right? The tariffs and the cost of fabric and the cost of product. And Alex, you're doing business in China right now. Like, is that a conversation that you and your business partners are having, or what's that conversation you have?
Oh, there's no question. It's something that we talk about, that we worry about. I think most Americans, even just on the retail side, in terms of having to go out, as you said, buy clothing for themselves, for their families, that impacts that. Those dealings of the bigwigs in Washington, they're daunting issues that cause a lot of unrest in our family and also my business family.
Yeah. What about you, Marc? Does that come up to you because you also design your hats, which is a very stylish hat that you're wearing right now.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
You may not have it. You may not get it sourced from China, and you may not. But is this something that you're paying attention to?
Yeah, I always pay attention to it. I don't, deal with China a lot, but I just feel like any of those issues, when you have issues like that, they affect all of us, because it doesn't have to be as far as your profession, but in the end, it's going to affect your money. Like you said, if you have a family, it's about the money that you're spending. It's about the money that it takes to get whatever product it is into the country. I feel like we're a resilient country, and I feel like whatever happens, we'll figure out a way to make it work for us and for our families. And I think that's from the city to the Midwest to the South. I just think we'll flow with it. And it's great that we're having this dialogue here, because I just feel like a lot of people just don't have the dialogue and really are not cognizant of it. So they're just, working people are just so concerned with, making it through that day, paying my mortgage, paying my rent, paying my light bill, grocery on the table, if I have tuition, kid has sneakers, kid has this or that. I think there are so many more people just surviving and, dealing with making it and focusing on that they're not even considering the tariff thing. And as the prices go up, you can go to the grocery store, and if, they have a cold spell, in Florida, okay, orange juice prices go up. You go to the grocery store, whoo, this orange juice is expensive now. Yeah. I think those type of things, because those are things you're dealing with every week, so they're focused on that and they'll pay attention to that. But as far as the tariffs with China and everything else, I think it's definitely more of a on a business side of things, on a manufacturing side, where the concern and the focus will be, because I think the average working person, I just don't feel like they're in that mix mentally at all.
What's interesting about this that you both raised, gentlemen, is this notion of sometimes we don't think about, even if you're not, the fashion person who's like digging in the thrift boutiques or digging in the thrift crates. If you're not the individual who is getting a custom suit by Alexander Sumner over here, or getting a custom hat by Marcus Williamson, we all have to wear clothes, right? No matter if it's just a white t-shirt and blue jeans, right? Like at the end of the day, you have to. And what we don't realize is that there is a cost that it takes to make that article of clothing that you just wear that ultimately gets passed on to you as a consumer. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not into fashion per se, you should be mindful of policies that are impacting the fashion industry that ultimately does impact you in your day-to-day, whether you have kids, whether you're trying to go holiday shopping for the season, or whether you're trying to put clothes on their backs. There is a cost that gets passed down, but due to either good policy or bad policy or passive policy that has been allowed to be in action, because individuals in the creative space and also to the consumers haven't been advocating, or even don't even know what to advocate for. And so hopefully within this conversation, there is a sense of awareness, right, in terms of the trickle-down effect and peeling the layers back and really showing how the impact of it all. Just to leave it really quickly, I'm talking about advocacy. I've talked about Trump a little bit. Nike has been in the news, as you guys know, a lot lately. And I don't want to do too much of a deep dive into it, but it's really thinking about corporate advocacy. I wrote an op-ed for CNBC where I discussed how corporations are going to have more influence in our political system. And I think we're seeing that happening with Nike when they did the controversial ad that you mentioned, Alex, with Colin Kaepernick. And what was interesting about that, and what I did was, Alex, I actually did this op-ed and I used Starbucks as an example. And Starbucks had this controversial rollout, if you recall, called Race Together, where they wrote a race topic on a cup. And they asked their baristas to begin a conversation on race in the morning time. And the rollout was handled pretty badly. It wasn't received well. But the intent of what Howard Schultz was trying to do was stir and create a conversation. And he wanted to do something because he felt like there was no other corporation that was advocating for Black lives in that space, in that capacity. But what we saw was that didn't have a negative impact on the bottom line of Starbucks. What ended up happening was Starbucks profits ended up going up that next quarter as a result of that. And that's actually what we're seeing happening with Nike. As a result of the Nike ad, we did see some of the burning of the clothes and of the shoes and ripping things up, but Nike sales increased by 31%. And so what we're seeing was that even if companies do have a sense of advocacy, that, bottom lines can increase. It doesn't have a negative impact on it. For sure. From your perspectives, should or has fashion, in your perspective, been involved in an advocacy space? Has fashion, generally tend to take a stance on controversial issues, and should fashion do more, or should fashion stay out of it? Just curious as your answers to that.
I mean, for me, I think fashion definitely does because you see it all over social media. Like, you see the people who support these brands, definitely they take a stand, for sure. Now, if we're talking about the brands taking a stand, I don't think every brand, but I think you see more brands than ever have done it take a stand. But I think it's also become a part of the new business model. So that's just like, okay, if you're going to open a business and you give a part of your proceeds to some charity or organization, that's one of the new looks.
So brands should take more of an advocate. You think? What about you, Alex? What do you think fashion's role?
I agree that communally we should. I mean, I'm a little hesitant to give Nike a lot of credit for jumping onto this. I mean, it's complex, and I know there's not a tremendous amount of time that we have now. But I'm all for.
Let's not look at Nike, but just should fashion be engaged in either social discourse, political discourse?
I know fashion is engaged in social discourse, and finding other ways of having healthier ways to manufacture in the environment and what have you. There are a lot of things that are happening right now.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. A wild and fascinating conversation that we have taken you on. But the bottom line, I think, the driving home is that there is a policy implication that comes to fashion with the white T-shirts that you're rocking and the blue jeans that you rock and the Nikes or whatever shoe brand that you rock. And Alex really brought it home and just talked about the overall global imprint that fashion has, and particularly when it comes to the environment and other entities and the social construct and social issues. You have been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much for listening. Alex, how can people find you on social media or learn more about Acustom?
ACUSTOM, acustom.com. Yeah, and Instagram is Acustom.
Awesome. And Marcus, where can people find Flamekeepers
Hat Club? Instagram, Flamekeepers Hat Club, and online, flamekeepershatclub.com. Come check us out for sure.
And I am Mike Muse, MUSSME, and here at SiriusXM Insight at SXM Insight. Until next time, people, we out.
Peace.
Versace, 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 whoa, Versace, 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 Versace.